Welcome to the RE1 and RE5 study lesson on the scope of the FAIS Act, Part 2. In this video, we will focus on the definitions of advice and intermediary service. As a quick revision from Part 1, for any interaction to be regulated under the FAIS Act, all three elements must be present: a financial service, a financial product, and a client. A financial service is defined as advice and/or an intermediary service. The words and/or are important, as they mean that a person provides a financial service if they render advice only, intermediary services only, or both advice and intermediary services. We now turn our attention to the definition of advice and the definition of intermediary service. We have learned that a financial service is defined as advice and/or an intermediary service. This means that we must now define advice and then also define the second type of financial service, namely an intermediary service. The FAIS Act defines advice as recommending or guiding a client to buy or invest in, cancel, replace, or change a financial product. Advice applies even if it forms part of financial planning, is incidental, or does not result in a transaction. The act of recommending or guiding alone already constitutes advice. There are no additional conditions required. However, we now need to clarify an important point. When we sell a product, we provide information about that product. This information can be factual information, or it can include the provider's opinion. If a financial product is sold using facts only, and the information would not change if the client's circumstances change, then this is not regarded as advice. Although the term non-advice is sometimes used, it can be confusing because it does not automatically mean intermediary service. When a financial product is sold using factual information only, no judgment is exercised. In this case, the activity is not regulated under the FAIS Act, but rather under general consumer protection laws. However, if a financial product is sold by providing an opinion or information that would change depending on the client's circumstances or needs, then judgment is being exercised. This is regarded as advice and is regulated under the FAIS Act. Just when we think we understand these definitions, another important point is introduced. The FAIS Act states that advice can be given by any form or medium. What this means in practice is that when we must decide whether a specific action is regarded as advice or not regulated, we ignore the medium. Whether the information is given in a pamphlet, over the phone, or in person is irrelevant. This is often where learners get confused. They assume that a pamphlet cannot be advice or that a phone call must be advice. That is incorrect. We do not look at the medium. We look only at the message. If the message consists of factual information only, then it is not regulated under the FAIS Act. If the message contains an opinion or guidance that would change depending on the client's circumstances, then it is regarded as advice. An important exam tip is to take a black pen with you into the exam. The regulatory exams test your ability to solve compliance problems. You are not simply answering questions. You are making compliance decisions. In law, certain facts are irrelevant when making these decisions. Irrelevant information must be eliminated immediately, otherwise it will continue to confuse your reasoning. This is why you should use your black pen to scratch out irrelevant details. One of the factors that is irrelevant when determining whether advice has been given is the medium used to convey the information. So if an exam question says that information was given at a taxi rank by means of a pamphlet, you immediately scratch out the word pamphlet and focus only on the content of the message. Now we are going to learn how to apply what we call crossroad questions to determine what must be done, or how a particular situation is viewed under the law. The law is essentially a series of questions that guide our decision-making. Each question helps us decide which direction to take and how a situation must be classified. Throughout this course, we will repeatedly apply these crossroad questions. When you are given a situation and must decide whether it is regarded as advice or not regulated, you follow a specific process. First, you ignore the medium. Then you ask yourself the key question: will the information given change if the needs or circumstances of the client change? If the answer is no, then the activity is not regulated. If the answer is yes, then the activity is regulated. Let us look at a scenario. Namsa tells a client, "Based on your age and income, I recommend this tax-free savings account instead of the endowment policy you asked about." We now apply the crossroad question. Will the information given to the client change if the client's needs or circumstances change? The answer is yes, because the recommendation is based on the client's age and income. If the client's age or income changes, the recommendation would change. Therefore, judgment has been exercised, and this is regarded as advice. The second scenario reads as follows. James showed a client 2 life insurance brochures and explained how premiums are calculated and what each policy covers. We now apply our crossroad question and focus only on the information given to the client. In this case, the information consists of the brochures, the explanation of how premiums are calculated, and what each policy covers. We then ask, will this information change if the needs or circumstances of the client change? The answer is no. The way premiums are calculated and what each policy covers will remain the same, regardless of the client's personal circumstances. Because the information is factual and does not involve judgment, the answer to the crossroad question is no. This means the activity is not regulated under the FAIS Act. Intermediary service is defined as any action performed on behalf of the product supplier or client to sell or service a financial product. It involves a middleman action where the product supplier and the FSP are separate entities. When deciding whether a particular situation constitutes an intermediary service, we must ask two key questions. First, is an action being performed? Second, are the product supplier and the FSP two separate businesses? If the answer to both questions is yes, then the activity is regarded as an intermediary service. Examples of intermediary services include safe custody of funds, facilitating client claims, and product administration on behalf of the product supplier. However, it is incorrect to assume that taking premiums or handling claims automatically constitutes an intermediary service. The decisive requirement is that the action must be performed on behalf of another party. In other words, there must be a middleman. For example, taking a premium on behalf of a product supplier is an intermediary service. If the product supplier itself takes the premium, the activity is not an intermediary service and is instead regulated under sectoral legislation, such as the Insurance Act. Intermediary service, therefore, only exists where the product supplier and the FSP are two separate businesses, and the FSP acts on behalf of the product supplier or the client. In knowledge-based questions, you should look for the phrase "on behalf." In application questions, you must determine whether one or two separate businesses are involved. Note that a bank taking a premium in its banking function is an exemption, as this interaction is already regulated under the Banks Act. Now let us consider an example. NAMSA updates a client's banking details for an investment policy on request and submits the change to the product supplier. We now apply our crossroad questions. The first question is whether an action is being performed. Remember, if it is merely the giving of information, we apply the rules for advice. In this case, NAMSA is updating banking details, which is an action. So the answer to the first question is yes. The second question is whether the product supplier and the FSP are two separate businesses. We determine this by asking whether NAMSA works for the product supplier or for the FSP. NAMSA updates the client's banking details and then submits the change to the product supplier. This shows that she does not work for the product supplier. The product supplier and the FSP are therefore two separate businesses. Because both questions are answered yes, this activity is regarded as an intermediary service. Here, an employee of the insurance company resubmits a debit order. An action is performed. However, the product supplier and FSP are the same business, meaning there is no intermediary. Therefore, this activity is not regulated under the FAIS Act. This decision tree summarizes how to classify interactions. Start by asking if it involves information or an action. If information, ask if it's an opinion. If action, ask if the product supplier and FSP are separate businesses. This guides you to advice, intermediary service, or not regulated. Miriam Nkosi advised Jan de Beer that taking out life cover is a requirement when obtaining a mortgage bond, home loan, from Bank A. Step 1. What is the business/person doing in the interaction with the client? In this scenario, Miriam is telling Jan about a requirement linked to a home loan. She is not changing banking details or submitting forms. She is simply giving information. So at the first split in the decision tree, we classify this as information, not an action. We therefore move to the top branch of the tree. Step 2 is the information and opinion. Now we ask, will the information change if the client's circumstances change? Miriam is stating that it is a requirement to take out life cover if you take a mortgage bond from Bank A. That is either a true or false statement about Bank A's lending conditions. It will be the same requirement for every client applying for a mortgage from that bank. Because the statement does not change if Jan's age, income, or personal circumstances change, it is factual information, not a personal opinion or judgment about what is suitable for Jan. So on the decision tree, at the "Is the info an opinion" box, we answer, no right pointing arrow, follow the arrow to not regulated. This concludes part 2 of the lesson. Follow part 3, where we will discuss the definitions of a financial product and a client.